Welcome to If Only You Knew, where each week we take a deep dive into the careers and experiences of people from different backgrounds, cultures, countries and ages to discuss pivotal moments in their lives and the lessons they have learnt along the way.
If they told people the truth, they wouldn't last very long.
Whether you're a school student in an established career, mapping your academic pathway, searching for the perfect career, looking to change careers, or just plain curious, then this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Christy McCormack, and I want to ask you, what would you do differently if only you knew? My guest today is Nicole Murdoch. Nicole is a commercial, intellectual property, ICT and information security InfoSec lawyer and the founding director of Eaglegate Lawyers. Nicole is a member of the Queensland Law Society Cybersecurity Working Group and a former director of the Australian Information Security Association. In addition to holding a first-class honours degree in law, a master's of industrial property, being a registered trademarks attorney and a degree in electrical engineering, Nicole is also a loving wife and mother. So welcome, Nicole, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks.
Okay, so I'm exhausted just reading that short intro on you, Nicole. You are one accomplished woman. So firstly, congratulations on your success so far in your career.
Thank you.
All right, so your first degree was electrical engineering. Now, did you start that degree straight after year 12 or did you have a gap year or some sort of break between high school and starting university?
I had a gap year. My parents had moved to Melbourne and they didn't really want me staying up in Queensland unsupervised, shall we say. So I actually did a year of science down at Monash University, Clayton campus. And what I learned from that experience is Melbourne is absolutely fantastic, but I don't like cold weather.
Right, so you're back up to Queensland.
In a heartbeat.
So obviously that was a science, but looking back on your high school days, did you plan to become an engineer or was that sort of an evolution that happened after you sort of did that year down at Monash?
I had decided at the end of year 12 that I wanted to do something in science. So it was either going to be mathematics, science or engineering. My father was an engineer, or is an engineer. So it seemed natural that I would do engineering, and it didn't occur to me that engineering would be male-dominated because I'd gone to a girls' school. But once I got the letter from the dean saying less than 10% of applicants were female, it then occurred to me it may be quite male-dominated.
Absolutely. So you're not old by any stretch, but STEM in the early to mid-90s was not considered, a popular career path for females. And it certainly was not promoted like it is now. So do you consider yourself a bit of a trailblazer? And what were the challenges that you faced entering a male-dominated industry straight out of university?
I don't really think I suffered too much from the fact that I wasn't a man. Well, I'm not a man. But it never really occurred to me that, until I got that letter, that it would be male-dominated because I'd gone to a girls' school and we were all science. You're either good at science or you're good at English, and I was good at science. So it didn't really ever occur to me to do anything different. And I'd always been the type of person that wanted to pull things apart and find out how they worked. So it was quite a natural thing for me to study. But graduating from engineering, what I discovered from that is there's just not very many raw electrical engineering jobs in Australia, or at least there wasn't at the time. So I went into computer programming. One, it paid a lot better and there were jobs in it.
Because what exactly does an electrical engineer do?
Well, there's multiple divisions of it, so it really depends on the division you do. I did what was known as computer systems engineering, which was basically taking and building circuit boards and then writing software that would run those circuit boards. But the word engineering is quite a generic term, but it's basically someone who works out how things work and gets things working. So you often will see it bandied around as a term. And back in the day, there was no degree for it. The degrees in engineering itself are actually probably only 50 years old. Back in the day, if you wanted to be an engineer, you just studied under an engineer, and that's how you got your engineering training and your qualifications.
Wow, that's really interesting. I did not know that at all. I know a lot of engineers and some of them are quite old, so I thought they'd study their little hearts out, but now I might be able to have a little dig at them and say you didn't really.
That was when the transition was happening, when he was a teen, that there were then engineering degrees, but certainly in his father's day. And my father-in-law was technically an engineer as well, but he doesn't have a degree. but he's certainly qualified as an engineer because he went through the training system rather than the university education system.
Okay, so you did that, but then you went on to do a Juris Doctor law degree. Now, that seems like quite a shift in careers. So what made you take that leap?
Well, it was about 10 years later, and one thing I realised is I really, as a computer programmer, I just wasn't happy. I wasn't satisfied with my job. And what I really discovered is what I loved about my job was the managerial side of things and the legal side of things. So I was more interested in that than I was in coding. So it was always a thought maybe I should try and say move up in the industry to become more of a manager position. So back in the day, you became what was known as a business analyst, and they would take the requirements of the company, put them into basically a lot of suite of documents, and then provide them to the programmers for the programmers to actually write the code. But I couldn't get a gig. Every time I applied for the roles, they would say to me, well, you've got no qualifications, you can't prove you can do this job. So I wanted to do a BA at university, but back in the day, if you walked in with a BA and the boss didn't have one, you didn't get the job because the boss felt underqualified. So I'd always had an interest in law, so I thought I was very, very much considering doing it. What made me make the call was my father had suffered an arrest out of hospital and he'd been revived 5 times, but he made it through, but he was unconscious for quite a period of time and quite a period of time after they'd turned the drugs off. So we really just thought that was the end. But it turned out he'd had an allergic reaction to some of the drugs, so that's why it took a while to wake up. But he'd only retired 2 years before. So I basically turned around and said, well, I'm waking up every day not wanting to go to work, not enjoying what I do. If I'm going to die 2 years after retirement, I want to at least enjoy the journey through life. So during the time he was unconscious, I enrolled myself at Bond University. And by the time he woke up, I was a university student at Bond.
Wow. And what did he say about that? Did he understand the influence that what happened to him had?
The first thing he said when he woke up, I told him, and he said, oh, please tell me not Bond. And I said, oh, yeah, it's Bond, because I lived on the Gold Coast, so it was quite like natural for me. And then they had to sedate him because his heart rate went crazy. But no, he's always been very, very supportive. My mother, I think, and bless her soul, but I think she wasn't so happy about the decision, but she was an accountant, and I think she saw a lot of the evils in the world and wanted to protect me from those evils. And to be fair, on the law side, you do see a lot of evil.
Yeah. And how do you cope with that, I suppose, from a ethical and a moral standpoint, being able to, you see both sides of it? How challenging is that for you?
Fortunately, I think you grow into the role. There was a transition period for me where I became quite depressed and really, really lost my faith in humanity. And I guess you get to a point in your life where you can say, well, I can live like this in a depressed state and realise, the world's horrible, or I can just get on with my life and enjoy my life. So you try and distance yourself from it. Where it becomes difficult is where, you get some people that are quite narcissistic and really do want the other side's head on a platter. And even when they've got the person over a barrel, where they're completely winning, getting everything that they're entitled to through the law, they still want more, and they really do want to make the person homeless. They want the family on the street, and there's no reason for the family to be on the street. The person's been compensated for their losses, but they still want this person to suffer.
Yeah, that's tough. I think I'd really challenge, it'd be a challenge for me to deal with.
I'm quite open about this, and I will fire a client. I have no qualms in firing a client. That if they ask me to do something unethical, if they try and bully me into giving an advice that I don't believe is correct, I will simply terminate my retainer.
Well done for that, because I know a lot of people wouldn't do that. And I think that really shows, strong character. And, I hope that people listening out there that, are looking to enter that field really take that as take that advice on board, because your soul's not worth money.
No, that's exactly it. I can't be bought. I'm not a lawyer for hire. At the end of the day, I provide a service to my clients, but I'm not going to be a battering ram for them. But a lot of that comes from age as well, and I'm quite self-confident. And I come into the law as a mature age student. So I guess from that point of view is I did have that behind me. So I had no qualms in standing my ground.
So do you think the younger generation sort of coming straight out of university into law would struggle a lot more with that than what you were able to because you had, you'd seen real world action before?
I think I'm a better lawyer because I've been an engineer, but I do see a lot of the young ones come out. I mean, this is, the blessing of youth. They don't realise how lucky they are, but they're also at a massive disadvantage because they don't have that self-confidence. So occasionally you'll see, the bright young sparks coming out with self-confidence that, they've been brought up right. They've got the confidence to stand their ground and say what they believe, even though they might be completely wrong, and that's perfectly fine because no one's right 100% of the time. But then you see the young ones that are just almost too eager to please, and they fall over themselves and make mistakes.
So you've worked for a lot of large firms. So what is it really like to work for the powerhouses of the legal world?
I think the word powerhouse is misdirected. I think there's a lot of too much confidence. One of the things I didn't like about top-tier firms is a lot of the partners do believe that they are God. They believe they can do absolutely no wrong, and it's their way or the highway. I've had some truly horrible bosses in my time, but all they've taught me to do is not be them. But I have a way that I want to do business and a way I want to live, and I'm not going to be created in their shadow. But that's what they actually attempt to do, is they bring you down so that you feel so unworthy and so useless as an individual, and then they try and create you in their own shadow. And you've got to have the self-confidence to not be them.
So they're basically just trying to mold each person into robots, yes. I suppose you could say.
And when you look at the way law has evolved, it's a very archaic, one thing I didn't realise is it's a very, very archaic industry. It's not a flat structure whatsoever. Whereas in engineering, it's absolutely a very flat structure. And if your boss's boss says something and you think it's wrong, you'll turn around and correct the person or challenge the person. Whereas in law, you're not to do that whatsoever, even if you know 100% of the time that at the time they're absolutely incorrect. You are not to say anything. And I think that needs to go. That attitude needs to go. But that's the way the industry has evolved. So, let's make a new start and make a new industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you think that, obviously there's a lot of smaller firms out there with some really, really top lawyers that are coming away from those big firms. Do you think there will be a shift towards seeing a more flatline approach to law and taking away the hierarchical sort of structure that the big firms have?
Yes, and I think that's why a lot of the smaller firms are founded, is basically the people are just like me. They don't want anything to do with that kind of archaic background. But what I also didn't realise until I started my own firm is 99% of the firms in Queensland are 1 to 2 people only. The top tier firms with larger people are very rare. It's just they're so well known because there's so many people in amongst them. But the majority of law firms, almost 100% of law firms out there, are 1 to 2 people. And it's because people don't want to be associated with that kind of attitude.
That's really interesting. Do you find a lot of those people coming out of those smaller firms come from the big firms? Like, is that sort of a pathway where, you graduate, you sort of go into a big firm, you sort of learn a few things, good and bad, and then you decide how you want to go?
Yes, I think a lot of them have cut their teeth in the larger firms and said, look, this is not for me. And I mean, I found the same thing. It's just not for me. But a lot of them, a lot of people have just from as soon as they could operate on an unrestricted license, they did so. And they broke off as soon as they could.
I wanted to be a lawyer, never smart enough. So I don't know the ins and outs of it. But so how long do you have to work underneath someone? Like, what's the process? Once you leave university, what's the steps that you take to be able to practice?
Once you leave university, you need to get admitted onto the role of legal practitioners, and you do that by doing what is now a training system through. You can do College of Law, It's a legal practice course, basically. It used to be that you could just do it through a law firm, work for a while there. So once you're on the roll of legal practitioners, you're then able to practice, but you can't practice unsupervised unless you've got an unrestricted practicing license, and it takes 2 years. So basically, you've got to work for someone else for 2 years until you get that, as a solicitor, until you get that unrestricted practicing license. If you want to be a barrister, you basically have to sit the bar exam but practice for a year under supervision.
I suppose that's tough then for people coming out. You've got some limited choices, and you would probably, it sounds like, have to put up with a lot of emotional stresses and time stresses to be able to meet those requirements.
Well, I think it depends on who you work for as to what the stresses are, but I 100% agree with this 2-year period, and I don't want to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but I wish it was longer, because some of the people I see at 2 years just are still to think that they could represent someone completely unsupervised at the 2-year point. I just sometimes shake my head about their choices in life and the matters they're choosing to take, where you just think you've not got enough experience in this to be representing someone in a legal dispute.
Yeah, because I wonder how much research a client actually does into, a lawyer in particular before they are represented by them, like whether or not they're going right through their CV to see the cases. I would imagine most people would be going to a lawyer and just assuming, they're all equally sort of qualified and sort of going with them. So, yeah, I understand where you're saying with, 2 years is probably not enough. And as a paying client, you'd probably want somebody with a bit more experience. But at the same time, that then restricts those people with lesser experience of how they get that experience. So what would your suggestion be for them to be out there getting the experience that they need to be able to be really good solicitors?
I think life's really tough right now getting a job as a lawyer, but basically I think you need to find the right mentor in life, the right mentor in your career, and someone that you can align your own ethical, moral compass against. And once you find that person, I mean, you can sit there for a decade helping that person operate their law firm. But one thing I prefer people to do is become a bit more specialised in what it is they do, whereas, you'll see a lawyer who will represent any client in any dispute. And you can't be a man of all trades. You really can't. So I would be very concerned going to a lawyer that said, oh, I can help you with your will, I can help you with your divorce, I can help you with personal injuries, I can help you with IP. You just can't know all of the cases. You can't know all of the case law. You can't know all of the statutes. The other thing I think people need to be really careful about is these awards that go around. There probably isn't a week that goes by that I'm not, quote, given, end quote, an award for a small fee, which is often not a small fee. So if I wanted to, I could display every badge under the sun about these awards I've somehow gained that make me look, well qualified and everything like that. But a lot of them are just basically bought logos that you can put on the base of your email signature. They're just so false. But the general public don't know that. They see these awards and think, oh, well, this person's got all these awards, they must be really good. In reality, they're bought.
Wow. That's crazy.
Misleading.
Yeah. Because, you see somebody and they've got, all these awards, you just assume that they've done something to get them to,
warrant. The person's done to warrant that award is received an email replied with a check.
That blows my mind. So you're really sort of doing the dash on me here, because my favourite show's Suits, and I was like,
I love that show too, but, it's a TV show. It's got nothing to do with reality. There was one show where they dealt with intellectual property, and I think it was the first time I physically laughed out loud at that show. They had filed a patent in the morning, and by 2 p.m. in the afternoon.
That's great. It's like the Grey's Anatomy of the league.
I mean, the fact that this man can, fake the interview and, hack Harvard or whatever it was, and no one's ever heard of him. Doesn't know where the pizza shop is. Oh, it's a great show. Let's face it, great show. It all looks so prim and proper and beautiful. But
do you end every day with a glass of gin or scotch or something?
Oh my God. No, I think I end the day with a cup of tea or I think hoping I can get some sleep that night.
Oh, wow.
No, McBeal, they used to go down to the pub every night. It's like,
Yeah, Ally McBeal, I think that was a great one as well. So much
yeah.
comedy to that one. Oh, sort of going back to, I suppose, the real world, away from suits. I know that I'm using air quotes here, my limited research on the matter, that lawyers are both lauded and judged on their billable hours. So how high are the expectations within different firms, and are they achievable?
No, they're not achievable and incredibly high. So at one of the firms I was working at, the way it would work was the client would receive a quote or an estimate from the partner. The juniors would do the work, but the partner would then review it. So the partner would take 100% of their time off whatever was billed, and then the senior associate would take some, the associate would take some, and then the junior was whatever left over, even though the junior may have done 5 hours, only maybe half an hour of that may make it to the bill. So you're actually not judged on the time you put on the time clock. It's the time you end up on a bill for. So at that firm, we had to do, because of the way they work the system, we had to do 15 hours of actual work to get maybe 5 hours billable.
Wow. Now,
Yeah, and it was tough. So I used to stay until like 2 a.m. and you had a rule where you had to get your timesheet in by 9 a.m. the next morning. So I'd be at my desk at 6 a.m. They'd see me, HR would see me log on, they'd phone me and say, why aren't your times there? And I'd say, well, because I left at 3 a.m. I didn't feel like, putting my time in at 3 a.m. I'll do it before 9. And they'd say, no, do it now. And I'd say, no, it's due at 9. So this is why I'm not suited for top tier. I will set it, but not submit it until 1 minute to 9.
So did you have any input in setting those goals? Because they seem like
Oh no,
huge.
you're told. Yeah, you are told you must get I think it was 5.3 billable per day, and it's not just top tier. I had a friend of mine, now left firm, but it was a smaller firm, only 5 people, but the boss was quite on the spectrum. And my friend got a formal written warning because he was down 1 hour on one day. But what the boss didn't put down on that formal warning was my friend was already up 5-6 hours that week.
Wow.
So even though he'd done extra time that week, he was down 1 hour one day and he got written up for it. That boss was particularly special. So my friend had to take a family emergency phone call at 10 a.m., went outside to take this phone call, and the boss started coming out accusing my friend of theft very loudly, to the point the person on the phone saying, what the hell is going on? And the theft was he was stealing time because he wasn't at his desk.
Oh my goodness. My
Yeah.
mind is
But to be fair,
literally.
that boss is particularly special and should not be allowed to supervise anyone.
Yeah. I
But that's
hope
what's
that
allowed.
that's
And
not
what annoys me at this industry is there's no support for juniors. So we support the customers and we've got all of these trust rules and all of these ethical rules and everything. So everything's about support the client. Absolutely, I don't disagree with that. But what about the juniors? One of my friends had a folder thrown at her. It was open. It was one of those arch lever folders. It was open. Could have taken an eye out. The boss was annoyed at some judgment. She just happened to walk in the room at the wrong time. So she went to HR and complained. And she got berated by HR because she shouldn't have annoyed him.
Oh my, it's just amazing. You hear about these sort of stories in, other
So
industries,
many.
but
Yep.
that's just
Yeah, absolutely disgusting. Really,
yeah.
just people don't know that this is, a lot of this is top tier areas.
Mm.
Again, they think they're gods. They think they can do anything. And what you see when you go to HR is you think HR is going to help you because they're meant to be independent, but they're not. HR's job is to protect the money earner, and the money earner is the partner. So they will protect the partner despite the junior, because juniors are replaceable. I mean, everyone's falling over themselves to work for top tier firms to try and get experience.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. So is there any sort of, not necessarily professional body, but is there any, I suppose, support at all for juniors when they come out? Like, is there anybody
So
looking out for their best interests?
So I've approached the Law Society to try and get some kind of support system for juniors, and there's a lot of mentoring in the system where you can have people you can go and speak to, but there's no capacity for the junior to complain and put in I mean, you can complain on ethical grounds and things like that, but a lot of the juniors won't do that because they'll lose their job and they won't get hired through someone else if they complain about their boss. And when you push the Law Society and push the industry a bit more, what you discover is, there's a lot of mental health issues, and they do give mental health support. So I know a lot of industries do it. There's a hotline you can call that if you need to talk to someone, you can, and things like that. So they do provide that kind of support. But I do wish that there was some mechanism where you could almost report these things anonymously, although I recognise that a lot of the situations won't be anonymous because they'll work out who you are. But I do wish there was a lot more freedom for juniors to say, hey, this person should not be acting like this. This is just not suitable in this day and age.
Absolutely. And there's obviously, there's quite a few lawyers out there, but the legal world is quite small. So most people know most people. So that must be really hard for anybody to speak out because, news travels very fast, and I imagine it would travel twofold in the legal world.
Yeah. And it's quite sad to see, but, a lot of women are like me in that they haven't had a fair go compared to the way men are paid, even though we might be, the highest biller or the second highest biller in a firm. We still don't get paid the same amounts that other partners do. And when you ask about this and you ask why, they'll make every excuse in the book to excuse why they're paying these other people more money. But on the back end, they're saying, well, you've got to, bill 3 times, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And then you look at that person's billing and you kind of go, well, why did the billing 3 times rule apply to me, but they don't seem to apply to these other people? Like this is not fair. So you see a lot of the smaller firms and the independent firms are founded by women. And I think a lot of it is because we just don't get a fair shake.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's, obviously we know about the gender pay gap and the disparity in that, but in the legal world where you can really look at it for, billable hours and things like that, you would think that it
should be if they are truly judging you based on your billing, then if you bill the same, why are you not paid the same?
It seems a bit contradictory to say, we're going to look at you on your billable hours, but then we're not actually going to pay you on those.
Yep, bingo. Yep.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So you went on to become a senior associate and then a director of a well-respected firm in Brisbane. How long did it take you to move from senior associate to director, and how much work went into getting that promotion?
Short answer is a hell of a lot of work. But it was probably 3 or 4 years from the time of senior associate to director. But at the end of the day, I was basically running my own little practice within the practice group. So I was bringing in clients, landing clients. I was able to bring in enough work to actually give work to juniors. And once I was able to basically have 2 juniors, you kind of get to a point where you're sort of saying, well, hold on, I'm effectively running my own firm here. So you can either keep me on and make me a director, or I can go start my own firm because I'm basically running my own firm anyway. So why shouldn't I do it for my own benefit? That's one of their decisions to make as a firm is, how much do you want to keep the person? How much is that person making you money? And so you've got to make a decision. And I guess people get to that position where they're senior associate and they say, well, if I'm not moving ahead here, why stay here? If there's no future for me here, why stay? But there's a whole heap of people who don't want to ever be partner. They're just happy to do their job, come in every day, do the job, move on. So a lot of them don't become partners or directors. They actually become, special counsel or something like that, where they've got no responsibility whatsoever of the partnership. They don't make any decisions, no administrative decisions, but they're basically running their own little.
So do you think on reflection that your effort that you put in, over not just those 4 years, but over your career paid off to get you to that director position?
Well, yes, it taught me a lot, and I got to see how law firms operate from that administrative perspective, which has certainly helped in my own firm. One thing I didn't really anticipate starting my own firm was just how much admin There is. It's just crazy, and particularly this time of year, because we have a non-audit that we have to go through, which needs to be submitted to the Queensland Law Society by the end of May. So yesterday, being end of month billing, as well as the requirements for all of this, it's just hell. And I just absolutely hate the way we're so mollycoddled and so restricted and so checked up on, that we're kind of paying for the crimes of others that we've done nothing wrong, and yet we've still got to jump through a lot of hoops for regulation and things like that.
Yeah. So. Because in 2018 you started your own practice, Eaglegate. So yes. I'm assuming from, our conversation that you did that because you had gotten to the position with your previous firm where you were running your own staff, and the next logical step was your own firm. Am I correct in that?
Yes. Yeah, basically, I kind of got to the point where I sort of said, well, I'm building someone else's practice, someone else's law firm. Why shouldn't I be building my own? And I had some very, very good clients that had assured me. In fact, one of them actually put the idea in my head. They basically turned around and said, why are you working for a firm? You should be having your own firm. And I kind of went, oh, yeah. And then about a year later, I thought, hey, why not?
So was it a nerve-wracking decision to go, okay, I'm going to leave a firm, I'm going to go out on my own?
Yes, it is. And, you've got to give the month. I had to give a month's notice. So that month is just quite nerve-wracking because you don't know what's going to happen. And look, if this had happened during pandemic time, I would have gone down a gurgler. But I had some fantastic referrers, fantastic clients. And I also, started basically from the office I'm sitting in now. So no overheads. My overheads to start the firm was insurance with the Queensland Law Society and company establishment fee. So that was pretty much it. So I just needed to feed myself. That's all I needed to do. And I was quite happy to just feed myself, plod along, let it grow, see whether it grows. But I also knew that, I've got a fair enough reputation in the industry that if I wanted to go to another firm, I could have turned around, put my hand up and said, this running a law firm's not for me, and I would have jumped ship to another firm.
Because you are very well accomplished, because we didn't cover this earlier, but you've also got a Master's of Industrial Property. What part does that play in your career? What that Master's degree, where does that fit into the whole story?
Started because at the time I was training to be a patent attorney. And to be a patent attorney, you need to complete 9 subjects. And those 9 subjects just happen to be the 9 subjects of an industrial property degree or master's. So I basically studied their patents, things like patent law, patent practice, trademark, designs, copyright, that sort of thing, as well as drafting and invalidity and things like that. And I basically did those subjects and then realised I really did not like drafting patents and really did not want to be a patent attorney. But I really like that the other side of things with the litigation and things like that. And I found that a lot more interesting than I did the drafting. And I'd always had this job offer. My firm had a very good relationship with the firm I ended up going to. And every time we would do our networking functions with them, the bosses of that other firm would effectively say, are you ready to come across yet? So I just basically sent them an email one day and said, okay, I'm ready now. And they offered me the job and I went across, and that was 2011. So at the time I had just finished the Masters, or I was just finishing it. Yeah.
That's a lot of study.
Pretty much. I don't recommend it. Occasionally, I'm the same. You could at least Google a girl, before you get these people in the industry. I really recommend, old men trying to give a young girl advice, and they say, you should go ahead and get a degree. And I look at them and think, you could just Google a girl. I've got enough degrees. I don't need any more.
Because I would imagine, most people in the legal world, they don't really have that many degrees. They're not from an engineering.
No, it is quite rare. But I've got to say, I had the opportunity to do law when I was doing engineering. I'd apparently only missed out on law. I'd put it down as an option, but I'd only missed out by one place. And my father said to me at the time, well, you should go and ask to be let into law, because they will have had at least one person drop out, and, admitting one more is no effort for them. But, I didn't have the internal fortitude. I didn't have the bravery to go and do that. But I'm very glad I didn't now. I think I'm a much better lawyer because I've had that experience.
So obviously you're experiencing a wide range of law, areas of law, and a lot of those take a hell of a lot of time, the cases. So how How do you balance the caseloads when you've got, IP cases that can run for years in it? How do you balance that? How do you know when to take on new clients and when to say, no, my plate's full?
Well, it's fairly easy in terms of caseload because I don't think I've ever had evidence due at the same time of all the cases or even two cases at once. Evidence is spread out amongst the case. But also, 99% of cases settle before you even get to that stage of throwing evidence at each other because, basically the purpose of filing a case is to indicate to a court you need someone else to resolve the dispute because the parties can't resolve the dispute. But once they actually file and start getting into the heaviness of a case, they'll often find some motivation to try and settle. So, a lot of the cases you file don't get to that phase. So I would say maybe 1 in 100 cases that I would deal with across my desk maybe go to the point of actually filing, and then maybe 1 in maybe 15 or 20 of those will actually go to a hearing. So, yeah, it's not hard to juggle.
Well, that's good. Because I know you do have staff now on board. Obviously, you started in your office there, but you're growing. How do you balance managing the staff with that caseload and then trying to get new clients on board? How do you function running your whole business but still being that face of the business?
Yeah, I will be the first to admit I'm a terrible people manager. I'm a terrible boss because I'm just too soft. I really do need to be a bit harder. But, at the end of the day, my junior, well, I shouldn't call him a junior because he's quite an experienced lawyer in himself and quite accomplished himself. But we've been working together for 8 years. So he was at my old firm with me. So we work well together. And we tag team well together. But he basically runs his own files to the point, but I supervise. So we'll run ideas past at each other. And that's why I like having a junior is, you can turn around and go, hey, what do you think? Do you think these two trademarks are too close? What do you think about this jurisdictional issue or something like that? That's fantastic to have. But yes, and particularly in pandemic world, because I'm working from home, he's working from his own home. So we don't really see each other. So we have weekly meetings and we email all day, every day. But in terms of that interface, we don't have that anymore.
And so are you sort of waiting to get back to do face-to-face, or do you think the virtual sort of thing has been working for you?
Well, yeah, we were about to sign a lease. Literally, we were days off signing the lease when all of this pandemic blew up. And I think if the pandemic had come a week later, we'd still be in our own premises. But working from home does seem to work for us. I do have motivation issues because, it is my home. So I still get distracted by home things during the day. But, at the end of the day, we're still making budget. We've got no overhead. So for the foreseeable future, I don't see us getting an office.
And how is your family with, all the decisions that you've made? How much of a factor did they come into play with regards to, what you chose to study, when you chose to study it, how much you invested into your career, those sorts of things? Because obviously you're a mum and you're a wife and you've got to balance those things as well. So how are you able to manage all of that?
I'm really lucky in that I've got an amazing supportive husband, and he'd known I wanted to do law for quite a while, and obviously going through the trauma of almost losing my father, he was very understanding during that period of time. So I think he understood. But we were quite fortunate in that we're living on the Gold Coast, and back in the day houses weren't too expensive, so we didn't have much of a home loan. But I also liked it in that it gave me an opportunity to spend more time with the kids, which were toddlers at the time. So during semester break, I could spend the whole time with them. They weren't at school. So I got to bond with the kids a lot more than I would have if I'd been working. And even on my days off, I would just, not drop them at kindy that day so that I could spend time with them. So I was quite lucky in that respect. I think my daughter is probably a bit more outspoken than she would have been if I had not been a lawyer. She's a born lawyer, but she doesn't see it. So, yeah, she's very argumentative and very good at arguing and very good at running an argument. And I lose arguments quite often to my 17-year-old. But that's life, and this is mum's job.
So did you see the further education as an investment in yourself and your family and a way to move forward, or did you have sort of other aspirations that you just wanted to do it?
I just wanted to do it. The purpose of doing the law degree was not actually to practice law. Doing the law degree was because I wanted to move up in positions in respect of the programming firms and the like. But on about day 5, and I had a standing offer to go back with my boss. My boss said, "I'll go ahead, do it, but come back when you change your mind." And day 5, I rang him up and I said, "Mate, I'm not coming back." I just loved it. I loved it from the start.
Do you feel like going back to any of those firms that didn't want to give you a job as a business analyst and go, look at me now?
Yeah. I do remember one of my ex-boyfriends, his father did not approve of me, and he basically said, "Oh, she's going nowhere in life." I'd like to meet him again.
That would be an interesting conversation to be a fly on the wall
Yeah,
for.
but at the end of the day, you can't judge yourself based on, somebody's bad opinion of you. I mean, you judge yourself on yourself, and I don't compare myself to other people. I am who I am.
So how do you see Eaglegate growing, and what's the next step for Nicole then?
Well, I should probably try and expand, and we were about to hire a junior at the time of the pandemic, but it's really hard to have a junior not face-to-face because you've got to train them and you've basically got to micromanage everything they do, and that's difficult to do remotely. So to do that, I need to get an office, and to get an office, I'm going to have overheads and things like that, and I'd like to avoid that at this point in time because, we don't know what's around the corner. But in terms of the next step, launching another company called Out of Court, and we're probably going to launch that within 2 weeks, but it's basically a private judge service. So for people who don't want to go anywhere near a courtroom, they can, instead of hiring a lawyer, they can basically appoint a judge a private judge. One of the panelists is actually an ex-judge, but to make the decision for them, so they don't have to have the overheads associated with the lawyer with getting the evidence in place and things like that. The panelist will basically organise all of that for them and assist the parties with that so that they can avoid the legal fees. They avoid court fees, they avoid barrister fees. So it's a lot cheaper and it's binding.
That is such a fantastic idea because, obviously legal fees, they're your bread and butter, but they're, it's very hard for a lot of people to come up with the fees that are required to litigate any sort of matter.
It's quite unfortunate that, the way the laws have evolved is, if you want to go to a court and you basically need to have a lawyer and you need to have a very, very good barrister because the rules of evidence are very tough now. Lawyers need barristers to get that sort of thing right. And if lawyers can't do it who are trained, how can a layperson get this right? Whereas the laws of arbitration, which is what this system is, it's an arbitration system, the arbitrator has the rights to set their own rules of evidence and be a little lax on that and sort of say, well, hold on, these are lay people providing me with this evidence. And the arbitrator can also do their own investigations. Whereas a court, in our system, a judge cannot do that.
Yeah, so the judge is solely relying on the evidence being put forward. They don't do any investigation.
Yes, basically, and that's one of the major differences between the laws around the world is in other jurisdictions, a court can go ahead and do their own research, whereas in Australia, a court can only make a decision based on what's presented to it in that case.
So therefore, you're really relying on having an ethical lawyer on the other side of the bench and faith in your lawyer that they're able to present enough evidence.
Yes, and that's why you need lawyers and that's why you need barristers. But, it's such an unfortunate thing that it's evolved to such a point that lawyers effectively have a monopoly over this because, other people aren't allowed to give legal advice whilst taking funds because that's against the law. So lawyers have that monopoly, and because the court process is so complicated, they have the monopoly in court. So one way around that is to use arbitration services, which is effectively what this firm is.
Well, I'm excited to see that.
Yes. So it should be good, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got the final and most important question for you of today. So, Nicole, looking back, if there was one thing that you could do differently, if only you knew, what would that be?
Oh, I've been racking my brain to come up with some great answers. I don't know what I'd do differently. I'd spend more time with my mum. I'd spend more time with family because I think at the end of the day, you don't lie on your deathbed and go, gee, I wish I did another hour that day at work. So I do wish I'd spent more time with the kids instead of necessarily spending so much time building a career. But at the end of the day, you build a career so you can spend time with kids. So, yeah, I try not to have too many regrets in life because I don't want to be one of those people that just sit there and go, oh, well, my life's ruined because this thing happened to me when I was 2.
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. Yeah. And I think, life's not about getting a do-over. It's about being able to, reflect and look back and appreciate sort of where you've come and take advice from other people as you're sort of going along the way, like we spoke about mentors before. So, yeah.
But I think it's very important in life that you need to move on and you should not hold grudges. We've all been through things in our lives where we've had to overcome adversity, and we all have things hanging over our shoulders where you sort of think, oh, my life might be very different if that didn't happen. But you've got to get on with life. And one thing I see in some clients is they basically catastrophize over something that happened to them many years ago, and they blame everything bad in their life based on this one thing. And I sort of think that they almost need counselling to move on so that they can get on with life and move on beyond that bad thing that happened to them, and get on with life. And, it was a very sad thing happened last year that I basically had a client where that was happening. And I remember saying to a junior lawyer at the time who was working with me, and I said, unfortunately, this client, basically the client needs counselling, but this person is fixated on this bad thing that happened and in their life. And yet the reality is we all have adversity in our lives. We've all had to overcome something. So sometimes you just need to suck that up and get on with life. And what I didn't realise at the time was that person that I said that to was very, very ill internally. And he died a few weeks later. And so he had basically very bad lungs and died of a chest infection weeks later. And he had been living with that all his life. So every day he had to clean out his lungs, but you never saw him. I never knew that. You didn't see him hold that, up and say, well, my life's ruined because of this. He just knew how to get on with life and enjoy the best life he could.
Well, I'm sure he had, enjoyed having the pleasure of knowing you through his life, and I'm sorry for your loss. And
I
think everything that we go through teaches us lessons, and this is what this whole podcast is about. It's about people telling their stories and how we can help one another, and everybody's journey is unique. So I thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me today. But if anyone out there wants to know more about Nicole and Eaglegate Lawyers, visit eaglegate.com.au or follow Nicole on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to check out her full bio on our website. For more information about our guests or our show, visit ifonlyyouKnew.podcast.com.au. And feel free to connect and comment via LinkedIn or Instagram at If Only You Knew Podcast. Remember to always be honest with yourself and others. Pause, reflect, learn and move forward. See you next week.